Hello again. Last time, I analyzed Undertale's combat system. In this video, I'm going to look at the game's story and talk about how Undertale can do so much when it was made by such a small team. Once again, if you haven't played Undertale yet, here's your spoiler alert. This time, I'm gonna delve in deeper into the game's story, so if you have any interest whatsoever in playing Undertale, you should. As I mentioned last time, Undertale mixes the style of classic Japanese RPGs with the player choice popularized by modern Western RPGs. There is, however, one big handicap working against Undertale. It was created by a single developer, Toby Fox, with help basically only on the art and character design departments, mostly by artist Tammy Chang. That means no access to the thousands of man-hours required to create an expansive experience like Skyrim or Mass Effect. Yet, Undertale's world feels like it reacts to the player as much, or sometimes even more than those games. How's that possible? For starters, Undertale is, in fact, a very linear game. There isn't really an open world to explore. Players mostly just walk right. It's also a short game. You can easily beat it for the first time in around 4 hours. This game excels at doing the most with little resources. Naturally, the very simple visual design makes creating new areas faster than it would be otherwise. While Undertale's visuals can certainly be reminiscent of the 8 or 16-bit eras of consoles, it doesn't try to copy the limitations of those eras. It just goes for simple 2D visuals. Like all video games, some assets are reused between areas, but Undertale does that very openly and mocking itself. Sans guard posts, for example, are all covered in snow, even in the lava-covered Hotlands. There are a few moments that conveniently use dialogue on a black screen in order to avoid having to create many new sprites. Every enemy has battle sprites that mostly just face the player with minimal animation, and are also completely monochromatic. Some more important monsters have battle sprites composed of many moving parts that move around separately, avoiding the need of creating costly sprite animation. Most characters also don't visibly move when attacking. Many NPCs are completely static and don't even turn around when spoken to, further reducing the workload and no doubt increasing the variety of creatures found around the underground. The fact all characters are monsters also conveniently allows for some very simple and plainly weird designs. On the few instances where there is traditional frame-by-frame sprite animation, it's mostly very simple. The main character's walking animation, for example, is a simple loop of 2 different poses when moving left or right, or 3 when moving up and down. This is very similar to RPGs of the 8-bit generation, and is probably the case both because of Undertale's heavy influence from the Mother series and to cut corners. All this saved time allowed the developers to focus the graphical design work on making the central characters very expressive by giving them a surprisingly huge amount of facial expressions. The skeleton Papyrus, for example, has over 35 different sprites just for his facial expressions. Undyne has easily over 50 sprites just for facial expressions, and also doubles as probably the character with the most overworld sprites. Sound-wise, the game plays around with the pitch and speed of its music, reusing some pieces with a lower or higher pitch for different effects. Many different songs also reuse the same melodies, with different rhythm or instruments, making the whole experience feel cohesive and greatly reducing the number of melodies that had to be created. As you can see, Undertale excels at making things exactly as simple as they can possibly be to convey the game's story. Of course, if the game had a bigger development team or more time, it's likely that some areas would have a little more polish, but the final product is perfectly functional. All this simplicity allow the developer to make the world react to the player in some very creative ways. Most of the changes are subtle, depending on how the player has been progressing through the game, with few exceptions. Undertale is also always recording the player's actions, even when you think it isn't. This game has a very interesting take on the concept of the fourth wall. The fourth wall is the imaginary barrier that separates the fictional universe from the audience, or in this case, the player. While Undertale doesn't go full-on Deadpool and openly breaks the fourth wall, it gives in-universe meaning to certain concepts of video games. Last chance for that spoiler alert. In Undertale, saving the game is not something you simply do to, well, save your game. Save is actually something that your character does in-universe. When the player character dies, they actually die, and through their own determination to stay alive, revive on the last time they saved. This doesn't mean nothing happened. The game frequently mentions stuff that happened before, such as the number of times your character has died. If you kill a character, then reload and spare them, sometimes the game calls you out on that. Other than that, the game has multiple small situations where it records your actions and brings them up later. If you buy a spider donut from the spider sale at the very beginning, for example, this will be brought up on the fight against Muffet, who will spare you for having helped the spiders. Note that she eventually spares you in any way, but the reason she does that changes depending on the player's actions. When the player does following playthroughs, many characters vaguely remember the events from previous ones. Vaguely. Conveniently, just vaguely enough so the story itself doesn't change, but the effect that has on the player's experience is staggering. Those many small touches make Undertale's world feel incredibly alive. Of course, there's more to it than just small changes in dialogue. Undertale has three main paths that can be taken: the neutral route, the pacifist route, and the no mercy route. Going through the game killing some monsters, but not all of them, will result in one of many variations of a neutral path, with the ending being slightly different depending on which specific monsters were killed or spared. The only actual difference is, again, the dialogue, as the neutral ending comes as a phone call on a black screen. This allows for dozens of different endings, as almost every combination for each characters you spared results in a different ending. There are also extra comments for other stuff, such as keeping a certain item in your inventory until the very end, or finishing the game without healing, without saving, or without dying. Sparing every monster, usually called a pacifist run, will change the ending and open up a few side quests. Completing said side quests unlocks the game's best ending. This is, by all means, the grand finale, complete with cutscenes and music. As a way to give the player extra closure, you get time to walk around all of the game's world and have a last chat with every NPC. And yes, everyone has a few lines of dialogue to comment on the ending. Once again, simple changes in dialogue go a long way to making this game feel personal. Killing every single monster, a task appropriately named Genocide Run, or sometimes simply No Mercy, is the option with the greatest influence in the game's plot and ending. To do this, the player must specifically go out of their way to eliminate every monster in every area, and that includes repeatedly triggering random battles in each area until there are literally no monsters left. Once the player starts a genocide route, all save points display a counter of monsters left in the area. And in case the main character advances to the next area without killing all of them, the game goes back to the neutral route. As the number of monsters decreases, so does the random battle frequency, making this route a really time-consuming activity. This means that, by design, it's almost impossible to trigger this ending by accident. The player needs to be very determined to kill each and every last inhabitant of the game's world, and you can bet the game knows and acknowledges that. The game even acknowledges people who don't go through this ending but watch it on the internet. Another example of video game mechanic that is contextualized in-game is XP. Players are naturally led to assume XP means experience, but by the end they learn it actually means execution points, a measure of the main character's willingness to kill, which has a direct effect on how much damage monsters take. Similarly, LV doesn't stand for level, neither it stands for love as it's mentioned in the beginning. LV actually means level of violence. This is revealed by the character's sense, right before the final battle of a neutral playthrough, which is always the first playthrough unless the player somehow manages to trigger the genocide ending first, which is highly unlikely. This is the moment where Undertale decisively breaks off from other RPGs. You might have played your first playthrough as a normal game, maybe sparing most bosses but killing a few normal monsters here and there to level up and make your life easier. And then this happens. So, summing up, Undertale works incredibly well with how little manpower it had by keeping its graphical style simple and efficient, and by making many small changes, mainly in dialogue, which allow for incredible reactivity to the player's actions with comparatively little development time. Not only that, it also contextualizes basic RPG concepts, such as saving and loading, levels, and experience, as in-universe concepts some characters are aware of, which breaks down the fourth wall and brings the player much closer to the game's world. And that's all for today. Next time, I'm gonna finish this look at Undertale by looking more carefully at the game's first area, the ruins, and breaking down how it introduces a new player to Undertale's world. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, you can watch my ongoing series analyzing Pokémon Red and Blue while you wait for the next part. Also, consider subscribing or sharing on your platform of choice, you know, the usual YouTube stuff. Thanks again, until next time.